Can I borrow a pen?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
This one, none.
No. Okay.
Yeah. That one. Yeah.
Lovely.
Good morning, everybody. I found myself in a bit of an unusual situation today, whereby I'm having to introduce things. So, good morning to everybody for Planning Committee on Friday, the 28th of July. My name's Damien Hunter. I'm the planning solicitor for today's meeting. Our usual chair, Councillor Eileen Ragg, and our usual vice chair, Councillor Sarah Chamberlain, have both sent their apologies for today. So, an unusual situation of having to elect a chair and a vice chair for this particular meeting. Now, I understand that Councillor Howe has put himself forward as the chair for his sins, and likewise Councillor Brown has put himself forward to be vice chair. So, members, I'd like to take a vote on that and ask whether you're all happy for Councillor Howe to be the chair and for Councillor Brown to be the vice chair. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Lovely. Gentlemen, if you'd like to come and take your seats, and then you can take over from me. And just to say as well that Councillor Brown has declared a directly relates non-registrable interest in respect of item 11 on the agenda. The applicant is a relative of his, so we won't be taking part in that particular application. He'll be leaving the room. He can't take part in the discussion or the vote. Technically speaking, I guess we should elect another vice chair for that item, but unless Councillor Howe keels over, I think we'll be all good to go. So fingers crossed. I'll hand you over to Councillor Howe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Right. First off, before we start, we've got a health and safety announcement. There is no fire alarm drill anticipated today. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building through the nearest fire exit by following the green running man signs above the door. Yeah, there isn't one. Yeah. We'll worry about that later. The organiser of the meeting will tell you when it is safe to return. This is a smoke-free building. If you wish to smoke, there is a smoking shelter at the rear of the car park alongside the building. Toilets are available in the stairwell of the building at each floor landing. Water is available in reception. And finally, please make sure all your mobile phones are either muted or switched off. The supporting officers present today are Wendy Ormsby, Development Manager, Damien Hunter, Planning Solicitor, and Wendy Harris, Democratic Service Officer. This meeting is being streamed live to the Council's YouTube account, so I remind all members and officers making a contribution to the meeting to use a microphone, or your comments will not be heard. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of members. Wendy, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll start with yourself, Councillor Howe.
Present.
Councillor Brown.
Present.
Councillor Bailey.
Present.
Councillor Levine.
Present.
Councillor Barlow.
Present.
Councillor Wilson.
Present.
Thank you. We are just about quorate for today's meeting, Chair.
Just about's good enough. Right, we have a revised running order and speakers for today's planning applications. Can be found on pages 4 to 5 of the agenda. Agenda item 3, apologies. Wendy, please.
Yes, quite a few apologies. So we have Councillor Bruce, Councillor Cahill, Councillor Chamberlain, Councillor Gazzard, Councillor Hall, Councillor Heath, Councillor Riddell, Councillor Smith and Councillor Ragg.
Thank you very much. Declarations of interest, Wendy, again?
Yes, as mentioned by Mr Hunter, there is just one declaration of interest from Councillor Brown, which is for item 11 23/0459/CPE, and it's a directly relates NRI.
Councillor Bailey is asking to get your attention.
Oh, right, okay.
Whether she's got a declaration, I don't think she's probably had the chance to fill that sheet in.
Okay, so I'll come to you in a minute, Councillor Bailey. It's a directly relates NRI, and the nature of the interest is it's a relative. Sorry, apologies, Councillor Bailey.
Yes, can I make a declaration of interest, please? In relation to the Oak Road application, one of the applicants made a formal complaint against me, but I am just acting as a ward member, and it makes absolutely no difference to my role as the ward member. I'm free from bias and contamination.
Members, could I just bring something to your attention? I appreciate you filled out the sheet in respect to your interests at the start of this meeting, but for the benefit of the members of the public, one of the applications today, the applicant is actually a fellow district councillor, and that's Councillor Ledger. I understand he's not coming here today, but I just wanted to make sure that in your views, none of you have a particular close association with him. Because for the benefit of the members of the public, if the councillors know Councillor Ledger, which obviously all of them will do because he's a fellow councillor, they don't actually have to declare any interest in the application unless they're particularly close. If, for instance, they're friends outside of their roles and they go around to each other's houses, they have parties together, whatever it might be, they need to declare that. So I just wanted to confirm that nobody did have that close association in this occasion.
No.
Thank you.
Mr Hunter, can I just clarify Councillor Bailey's declaration for the agenda item 7? So she has declared that the applicant has made a formal complaint, but she is just speaking as ward member. Is that a declaration? Do we need to put that in?
It's not actually a declaration of interest, but what it is, it's just a case of explaining to the people that are here today that you have had this complaint made against you, and it's more a case of saying that, in your opinion, that doesn't mean that you're biased in any way in respect to the application, and that you haven't predetermined it or made a decision before you've come in. You've come in with an open mind. Okay. It's good to obviously have brought it up, but it's not an actual declaration of interest. It's just to confirm that there's no predetermination. Thank you.
Okay.
Excuse me, Chair. Just for the record, I'd like to, if for future reference, since Councillor Bailey's in the room, so we could determine who is who, I'd refer to her as Jess Bailey as me as Brian Bailey. Otherwise, we could be a little bit confusing. Even though she's considerably better looking than myself.
I was just going to say, in fairness, if there's an ID parade, I think we'll pick you both out. But yeah, for the purpose of...
Thank you, everybody. Are we okay now on declarations of interest? Good. Right, agenda item 5, matters of urgency. There are none. Agenda item 6, to agree any items dealt with after the public have been excluded. Damien, have you got something you need to read? Because we are apparently going into session again at the end of this meeting.
Thank you, Chair. At the end of this meeting, we did have on the agenda an application in relation to Palm Road Bess. That now has been withdrawn. The officers have received a response that this committee requested from the fire services, and it has raised quite a few issues that the officers now need to deal with and look into. Unfortunately, that response was only received, was it yesterday or the day? Yeah. So obviously there's not been time to be able to do those further investigations prior to today. Having said that, what I would like to do at the end is just take members into Part B, which is a private session where we can give some private legal advice in relation to that particular appeal, as you would do if you were getting legal advice from your own solicitors. You get that in private, and it's the same with the committee. So effectively, on this particular occasion, the public meeting will end. But then we'll carry on with the private session, and then the meeting will end. So I think probably best just to stop the recording before that takes place.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. In that case, we will move on to agenda item 7, which is planning application 2533 out land north of Oak Road, West Hill. Wendy, if you could please take us through that one.
Good morning. So this is an outline application for the erection of 23 dwellings with all matters reserved except for the vehicular and pedestrian access. And the site is land north of Oak Road at West Hill. This application is slightly unusual in that members are not being asked to determine the application. There has been an appeal submitted for non-determination of the application. So this application will now be determined by the Planning Inspectorate. However, we are required to let the Planning Inspectorate know what decision we would have made if we were still in a position to be determining the application. So that's what members are being asked to consider today. What would the recommendation be to give on to the Planning Inspectorate? There's also an update in that since the application, since the officer report was finalised, we have now had a formal comment from our consultant ecologist, which effectively confirms the conclusion that the committee report already comes to. Effectively, the conclusion of that ecological response is that it is the consultant's opinion that the current survey assessment is valid, comprehensive and compares well to previous surveys undertaken on this site and to other similar development sites currently being promoted within West Hill. The baseline habitat data collected can be used for any future biodiversity net gain requirement. No specific survey deficiencies have been identified, and overall, I do not see why on the basis of ecological grounds why the proposal could not be approved. So that confirms the conclusion that there are no sort of technical objections on ecological ground to this application. So moving on, this is the site location plan, which just shows a little bit more zoomed in the location of the site, which is currently an open agricultural field with housing to the north and to the east. And this it just shows you where it is in the context of West Hill. So it is on the southern, adjoining the southern edge of West Hill itself. So it's a countryside location outside of any built-up area boundary. And this is Oak Road running along here, where the access point would be taken from. This is the topographical survey, and the relevance of this is showing this shows the tree survey that was undertaken. The site is on all boundaries, has got some hedge rows, but also significant trees on the site boundaries, and also a significant tree in the centre of the site, protected by a tree preservation order. This is the illustrative layout. So this is an outline application. So the only matter of detail to be agreed is the point of access out onto Oak Road here. However, in most cases, there will be an illustrative diagram that seeks to demonstrate that the quantum of development that's been requested could reasonably be accommodated on the site, whilst having regard to certain, site constraints and character of the area, etc. And so we have had comments on the layout, notwithstanding the fact that it is only an illustrative layout. And the current situation is that concerns have been raised by the council's arboriculturalist, the tree officer, indicating that there could be pressures to prune or fell trees within the site, because the relationship with some plots is that there could be considerable shading of gardens and properties, which then leads notwithstanding the fact that the trees are protected, if people can put forward reasonable grounds that the trees are having a severe impact on their amenity, it can make it much more challenging to refuse permission for works to trees. So it's important to be careful that there's sufficient separation distances, etc., to avoid those pressures arising. So there is currently objections from the tree officer that the current illustrative layout doesn't give comfort that the quantum of development could take place without having adverse impacts on trees potentially in the future. This shows the detail of the access, which is shown. This is showing the visibility displays, and there's no highway objection to the application. They are satisfied with the access and visibility displays, and also any traffic impacts from the development. The scheme shows that there would be a footway coming through the development out onto the corner of the site onto Oak Road at this point. There are currently no footways at all along Oak Road, and that's something that I will come on to in a little bit more detail later. And this just shows the access and just shows the tracking that is deemed by the Highway Authority to be suitable and acceptable. This is an illustrative CGI. I mean, because the details of the buildings are not to be agreed, it is very just diagrammatic. What it does show is the fact that clearly, I mean, when you look, the site at the moment is an open field, and we'll see that from photos that are coming up. But obviously, once it's developed for housing, those houses are going to be apparent and evident within the site. So these are some photographs of the site. So this is Oak Road. So the boundary with Oak Road, there is a Devon Bank along here, but and obviously these photos are taken in winter, so where there's the lowest level of cover. In the summer, then obviously the foliage will be denser. But there is there's no tall hedgerows along here. It is primarily the trees that dominate the roadside. So there is quite a lot of potential for views through the trees into the site. This is another view. So this is the field here. And this is the tree, it's a very attractive tree right in the centre of the site. And this is, again, looking northeast, showing the single carriageway width of Oak Road. At this point, it sort of narrows, and the fact that there are no footways along Oak Road. And this is an extract from Google Street View showing the trees in leaf. So one of the issues raised is that this particular view through the tree canopy is highlighted in the neighbourhood plan as a valued view. There's the neighbourhood plan describes this as an avenue of beech trees, giving a cathedral-like feeling, a green and enclosed field that is a cherished feature of West Hill and Higher Metcombe. So there have been objections raised to this on the adverse impact of the development on this view. The trees that would need to be felled to facilitate the access have actually already been felled, so there will be no further loss of trees as a consequence of this development. And the officers don't agree that this view itself will be adversely impacted. So it isn't one of the suggested reasons for refusal for this, but I'm highlighting it because obviously it has been, it's something that has been commented on. So the key issues that we are considering with this planning application. So firstly, looking at the principle of development. So the site is located outside the built-up area boundary of West Hill. So it needs to be considered against Strategy 7, which effectively limits the nature of the type of developments that are acceptable in the countryside. And this would not meet any of the criteria within Strategy 7. However, as members are well versed with, by now, we have East Devon Council does not have a 5-year housing land supply, and therefore the tilted balance in favour of sustainable development applies. So what's necessary to consider is whether any of the adverse impacts of this development would outweigh the benefits. The first thing we've been looking at is the sustainability of the location of the development. As I mentioned before, West Hill has no footways, but in fact there are no footways for quite a considerable length when you're going into West Hill. In fact, if I just pop back to this aerial here, so the site is here, you come out. You would come out onto the road at this corner, and there are no footways actually until you're quite far up into West Hill. It is quite unusual in the fact that this whole southern area has got very limited footway access. However, most of the facilities in the town are up to into the northern part of the town. The consequence of that is that it's approximately 1,000 metres to reach the sort of the main area of village facilities. Also, with sloping topography, there's no street lighting and very limited access to public transport. So the consequence is that this would result in a development that is very car dependent. So that weighs against the development in terms of sustainability of location. Then we've considered the character of the area. It's not a designated landscape, it's not the AONB. However, as we've mentioned, there is specific reference to character and landscape character within the West Hill neighbourhood plan, which describes the settlement itself as a low-density woodland village within a framework of beautiful beech oak, silver birch and pine woodland. The site does have a rural characteristic, and the road access to it, as I've mentioned, is a valued view. The character of the area would no doubt change, as it would for the development of any agricultural field. It would go from obviously its rural character to a much more suburban field. But the trees themselves on the boundaries would be retained. The development would visually be read as an extension to the village within the woodland settlement, and thereby officers considered it would maintain the distinctive character of West Hill. Then we've been looking at the impact of trees. So there are objections raised on the grounds of pressures arising from the current layout, which I've touched on before, that we do feel that it's not been demonstrated that this quantum of development could take place without affecting these protected trees. There is also an objection from the lead local flood authority with regards to drainage. Again, that there's been insufficient information submitted to demonstrate that the development could bring forward a SUD, so a sustainable urban drainage system, which is the drainage approach which we should always be preferring. And again, questions have been raised about whether or not a smaller quantum, so a reduced, they've suggested that, for example, if one or two plots were removed from this, it would free up space for some above surface attenuation basins, etc., to get a better and more appropriate drainage system. However, this application seeks consent for a specific number of dwellings. So we would need to be convinced that the specific number, in this case 28, could be accommodated, and the Drainage Authority are concerned on that regard. Then the further issue is affordable housing. The policy requirement is for a 50% provision on this site. The applicants have submitted a viability appraisal seeking to demonstrate that it isn't viable to deliver 50%. The appraisal methodology has not been accepted by the council's surveyor who has reviewed this, and so we are not satisfied that that the quantum of affordable housing that's been proposed is justifiable in that regard. There would be a requirement for open space provision on the site, and if that were to be provided, it would need to come forward through a Section 106 agreement. If members were minded to approve this, then obviously that could be put forward to come forward in a Section 106, but at present there isn't a signed agreement. So if this were to be refused, it would need to be one of the reasons for refusal, because that would be something that would have to come forward, for example, at the appeal. That would need to go into a 106 agreement. Similarly, there would be the impacts, the ecological impacts, not the site-specific ecological impacts, which we're satisfied on, but the need to mitigate recreational impacts on the Axe Estuary Special Area of Conservation, again, would need to come forward through a Section 106 agreement, and in the absence of that Section 106 agreement, it would form a reason for refusal. So looking at the scheme overall and applying the tilted balance, we have the benefits of the scheme, which is the provision of housing, which we need, and a small quantum of affordable housing, but less than the policy requirement. And obviously some economic benefits during the construction and arguably supporting local services in the village. However, the adverse impacts, which is the creation of a car-dependent development, potential for pressure arising on protected trees and therefore on the character of the area if trees did need to be pruned or felled, inadequate surface water drainage and no mechanism to secure the necessary mitigation for ecology and open space provision and any affordable housing. And as such, this application is recommended for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendy. We have a number of speakers on this. First off, Richard Green, please. You've got 3 minutes and you'll get a 30-second reminder.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'm Richard Green. I live next door to the field in question and have seen firsthand how one of the applicants has sought to decrease the biodiversity value in advance of undertaking the surveys and putting this application in. He claims it's an agricultural field. There's no stock on there. There's no hay crop taken. It had been left fallow for several years, had developed saplings that had grown to 3 metres high. And before any ecological surveys were done for this application, there was a JCB in the field ripping it all out, and he's flailed the field down to bare earth. So I do believe that the biodiversity assessment, whilst it may have been found valid, is somewhat flawed in the fact that it didn't use a sufficient baseline on which to make its judgments. This is all set out in my objection. I also second the concern about the effect on the East Devon Heaths SPA. It's not necessarily the ex-estuary, it's the East Devon Heaths, which is only 420 metres away, and if it was 20 metres closer, obviously it would fall into the 400-metre zone where no development is allowed. And that's principally to stop cat predation on bird populations on the SPA. And who's to say a cat's not going to walk that extra 20 metres to get onto the SPA? Also, the RSPB have just acquired another field much closer to the site, which they're managing for birds. I don't know if you can pull the map up to show. I can show you. So that won't do. So yeah, if you go back to the aerial photo. So coming out of the site and turning right or going left on the screen, where the next junction is, keep going down. So no, too far. Sorry. Right a bit down. There. The field to your bottom left. There. That field now is owned by the RSPB, as are the two smaller ones below it, and they're managing that for birds. So that's a lot closer to the site and therefore at risk from cat predation. To sum up, really, I support the conclusion of the report before you and strongly urge you to endorse its conclusion and refuse the application. I do have some reservations about the robustness of the report, particularly in respect to biodiversity, but other sustainability issues. And I accept that the time to address these is to the planning inspector at the appeal. There are many challengeable declarations, assertions, and there are several inaccuracies and inconsistencies in the many pages submitted by these applicants. As this case has already gone to appeal, it is my view that now is not the time to go into them with the committee today. However, I strongly urge you to use all the powers at your disposal to press for the appeal to the planning inspector to be determined at a hearing and not by written representation, so that the reservations expressed by me and many others can be further expressed and properly considered by the inspector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Please. Peter Shrubshaw next, please.
Good morning. I'm Peter Shrubsole, and I own a house that directly is next to the field in question. I want to say that my wife and I are very supportive of the conclusion of the report that recommends the rejection of this, and because of the particular circumstance where this has already gone to appeal, that now is not the time for us to go into the reservations that we have about the assertions and the inaccuracies and inconsistencies in the hundreds and hundreds of pages that have been submitted by this applicant. Interested to learn that your ecologist report, which was recently referred to by you moments ago, whether that was submitted to you before the 120-page eco report that was submitted only last week by the applicants on this very issue, whether that report took the latest one into account. There are more than 150 pages just in the submissions of last week. The sheer number of objections that have been submitted by not just the village but beyond the village to this application is evident to all the documentation that you will have seen. Not a single supportive submission has been made, with the exception of one very sarcastic one, which is in fact an objection. So we urge you to agree with this report and reject the application and that document to go to the planning committee, but that you ask that the planning inspector hears this in an open hearing and not by written submission, which is what the applicants have asked for of the planning inspector. So I won't waste any more of your time this morning with going through many of the details that we'd like to challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is a Robert George, please.
Good morning, councillors. My name's Robert George. I live at High Broad Oak Road, and I'm the third house up from where that junction is to the right. I was looking at my back garden yesterday and saw the roe deer in the field behind, and that's the nature of that field. Again, like the previous speakers, my whole household and that of Summer Hill, who have asked me to mention them, that's the house that's actually on Oak Road in that corner, where the footpath that's proposed comes out. Wish to say that we're all very supportive of much of the executive report, and particularly its executive summary and the clear recommendations to refuse this application. The development proposed is simply not sustainable. And I do wish to take the opportunity to pick up on what EDDC keep reiterating about this facilities being about 1,000 metres away. They are not. Even the Hydrock consultants report for the applicants, the nearest facility is 1.4 kilometres, and that is the shop and the post office. Going up through, you get to 2.3 kilometres to the garage, the dentist and the hairdressers. Along roads that have no footpath, no street lighting, you wouldn't want to go there at night. Development proposed then is simply not sustainable from the access to facilities. I agree strongly that given the fact that the application has already gone to appeal, it's sensible not to deal again in the details of all of the issues. However, the penultimate paragraph of the summary done by the executive is worthy of particular note, and I'll read it to you. Taking all of the evidence into account, the adverse impacts of the proposed development in terms of location, and you've seen it clearly on the photographs, lack of suitable affordable housing, harmful impact on trees, lack of a sustainable SUD scheme, and suitable mitigation securing contributions are so harmful as to significantly and demonstrably outweigh its benefits. Finally, and many other residents ask that the Planning Committee accept the report's recommendation, is that what we're here for today, to refuse this application, and that EDDC supports the residents' request that the appeal of the Planning Inspector be determined at a hearing and not by written representation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And next we've got an Alan Cook.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Alan Cook. I was a parish councillor until recently, and I live nearby. I hope that the committee will approve this report and consider our points to strengthen the report. The application sits on the edge of the village, a significant distance from infrastructure, and is therefore contrary to East Devon Local Plan Strategy 7. Sustainable development. The HELO assessment for the site, WHO5, states that this is not a suitable location for development. The proposal is for an estate on a greenfield site, not easily accessible without a car and out of character with the rural location, which is the Neighbourhood Plan Policy 2. As it previously been said, Oak Road is noted in the neighbourhood plan as a particularly exceptional avenue of trees. The proposed development is too dense and in a form unsympathetic to the character of the settlement on its boundary and to the specific nature of this beautiful part of the village and contrary to policy. Most vehicles travelling out of the village from this site will join the B3180 at its junction with Oak Road, known as Tipton Cross, a notorious and dangerous junction with limited visibility. Prior to this junction, Oak Road meets Tipton Road at an acute angle, as you can see on the plan in front of you. We did that this morning, and without a passenger in the car, you cannot see to enter that road safely. Trees. The site is surrounded by mature indigenous trees along its boundaries. These are now covered by TPOs, but pressure will come from householders in the future to prune or fell because of the loss of light or risk of falling branches. The trees will only get larger, and the proposed houses are only just outside their present projection zones. The present site owner has already attempted to fell some of the trees in the avenue and has carried out little or no maintenance. Finally, I would like to address the removal of surface water from the site. Neighbours will address and advise how their properties are affected by present runoff from the field, but the situation will be significantly worse when a large part of the site is covered with concrete. The proposal is for deep soakaways. These are shown at 2.5 metres below ground level and close to trees which will be affected by the construction. The impact upon surrounding groundwater levels. Digging this deep in the gravel bed may prove too expensive and impossible. The alternative is to connect to the public sewer. Large sudden flows of surface water are the main cause of sewage overflows to rivers by water companies. So no new development should connect surface water to the sewers. I commend your officer's report and hope you will strengthen it and seek the inspectorate to hold an inquiry rather than written representations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next we have from West Hill Parish Council, Alison Carr, please.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Alison Carr. I'm the West Hill Parish Council Chairman. So much of what has been said this morning is echoed by the Parish Council. So I don't want to waste your time being repetitive, but I feel I would be remiss in my duty as a Parish Councillor if I didn't nevertheless tell you what the Parish Council thinks. So West Hill Parish Council strongly objects to this application, and we respectfully ask the committee to accept the recommendation in the report before you today. This application should be refused. The site is outside the built-up area boundary and also outside the proposed new settlement boundary in the draft East Devon local plan, and so is open countryside. It fails to meet the NPPF criteria for development in open countryside, A, because the adverse impacts of the proposal significantly outweigh the benefits, and B, because it fails to maintain the rural character of the area. East Devon District Council's recent land assessment, or HELA, has already rejected this site for sound reasons. The site is not in a sustainable location and so fails to meet Neighbourhood Plan Policy NP9, which encourages walking and cycling and reducing the reliance on cars. The site is more than a mile from any village facilities. Higher Broad Oak Road is very steep in parts, unlit and lacks pavements. All of the aforementioned will encourage car driving rather than walking or cycling to village facilities and is particularly unsuitable for elderly or disabled residents for these reasons. Public transport is poor, and the nearest bus stop, shown on the application, actually serves a bus that only operates once a day to Sidmouth and back. The infrastructure is inadequate. West Hill is already negatively impacted by increasing pressure on the infrastructure, and I know we keep saying this, and it's applicable to every application, but I do think it's worth taking this on board. With local schools at capacity already, and with the local GP surgery overstretched, these are matters of major concern to the community that could only be exacerbated by such significant development. The only recreational facility within West Hill is a playground for young children over a mile from the site. There is no football pitch or other large area available for ball games, etc. No significant development should be undertaken in West Hill until the deficit in infrastructure is resolved. The exceptional avenue of trees on Oak Road is a publicly valued view which should be protected for public enjoyment under Neighbourhood Plan Policy NP6. The creation of a vehicular and pedestrian entranceway would destroy this. The proposal does not reflect the established character and development pattern of its surroundings. Low density, individual designs, retaining hedges, Devon banks, avoiding the loss of trees, and so on. Previous planning applications and appeals for this site and also nearby sites set a precedent for refusal based on the adverse impact on an undeveloped and attractive rural area outside the village boundary.
That's 3 minutes.
Right, okay. So I could go on, but I would just like to reiterate what everybody has said much more ably before me, and the Parish Council thanks you for your time.
Thank you very much. And next we have the ward member, Councillor Jess Bailey. You get 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, committee. I totally support the officer's recommendation that this should be refused. I agree with the grounds. I might, tweak some of the comments, but my overall view is I strongly support it. And there are very, very compelling grounds, in my view, which are articulated by the officers, which I support. Just want to pick up just on a couple of points about comments that have been made today that I just want to make clear. When we talk about this being outside the built-up area boundary, the built-up area boundary is actually a very long way away from this site. It's not, those houses around it are not within the built-up area boundary, because actually the village's plan recognises that this large area is completely unsustainable because it's a really long way away from the centre of the village. So I just want to make that clear, that it's not like it's just outside the built-up area boundary. It's a long, long way outside the built-up area boundary. Secondly, in terms of footways, when Wendy showed them on the path, actually the lack of footways goes further than was shown. So there's a really long way without any pavement. The topography, sloping topography, doesn't really do it justice. The hills are incredibly steep. There are 2 really, really steep hills that actually make walking and cycling really quite challenging. And I think without, just on that map, it's actually quite difficult to see, to understand how steep it is and how, people will not routinely walk, that everybody will routinely drive because of the topography. There is huge opposition. I mean, you can tell from the number of people that are here today for this application, the number of speakers, and I very much support, I really hope that you will support the officers and refuse this application, and I really hope also that you will request the committee, either if they can decide themselves or if they formally request Ed Freeman, the head of planning, that this matter should be determined by way of public. We should request that the inspectorate determines this by way of public hearing. I did actually ask on the 5th of June Ed Freeman. I put in a formal request that it goes to public hearing because there's so much public interest in it, and people need to be allowed to have that opportunity to voice their concerns and to challenge comments that are made both during the hearing and in the written way, in a way that written representations just will not allow that fully. And the guidance, the planning guidance does say Where the proposal has generated significant local interest, a hearing may need to be considered. And I think this is the first time that I've ever, as a councillor, I mean, not many go to appeal, and I've never requested a public hearing, but I think in this case, I think it's totally justified. So I hope that the committee will support the officers, reject the application, and then will request a public hearing for the appeal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bailey. Committee, anyone like to kick us off? Councillor Barlow.
As ever. I'm happy to propose the officer's recommendation to refuse this application. I am concerned, however, when it goes to an appeal, that the arguments that you're putting forward can be overcome, and that we should be making sure that the officers have looked as deeply as they can into it to make sure that the arguments we're putting forward against this are as strong as they can be. But I presume this is the time to do that if we can think of any other reasons to put this. I also would like to ask if we are allowed to ask for this for public inspection rather than written representation, if that is in our gift, or if that is up to Ed. And I will ask the chair for advice on that, because I know he's much wiser than I.
In simple terms, yes, we can ask officers to request. It is set, and I'll look at Damien, it is set by the appeal inspector, determines which route he will take, not us, but we can request, and this committee can ask officers to request a form of hearing. I would ask, and I think that's what you're going to do now, is there's two types of public hearing, an informal hearing and a full-blown hearing. And I think we need to be careful about which one we're asking for, because both have cost implications, but one is much bigger than the other.
Sorry, going back, that's exactly my point, is can we afford to do this for the sake of 23 houses? As much as I understand the feeling in the room, this is a fairly small number, and we are looking at much larger numbers where we might want to save our money for.
Thank you, Councillor. There's actually three types of ways that the planning inspectorate can deal with an appeal. As you've heard, they can deal with it by what's called written representations, whereby the parties will just submit their arguments in writing, and the inspector will look at what's been put forward and make a decision. They can then deal with it by way of a hearing, which is a bit more of an informal way of dealing with an inquiry, whereby the inspector almost mediates, and everybody's entitled to have their say, and then the inspector will reach a decision. Or then there's actually a public inquiry, which is then, as you say, it then starts to ramp up insofar as then generally each of the parties will appoint legal representation and a barrister to put forward their case. And then there will be formal cross-examination of witnesses as well, rather than more informal discussion and people putting their arguments forward. I think from what I've heard today that everybody's been asking for a hearing rather than a public inquiry. So we're more than able to put that forward to the inspectorate, that's what we would like to happen, or that's what you would like to happen, and also the objectors as well. So those are the three types that we've got.
Also, I can get this to work. There you go. Again, I would listen to people that are wiser than me as to if that is advisable, because I know sometimes I've been to them where lots of people want to say lots of things. They all say the same thing, and we are basically, is that a good thing to do? Is it the best way to argue it? Or is it actually, in some cases, better to do it as a written representation, where you are dealing with facts and not dealing with passion? And sometimes that actually comes across to an inspector better. But again, I am not the best one with that, and I will bow to better knowledge than mine.
just to come back on that point again, which I didn't mention actually, if it's dealt with by way of a hearing, then the general approach that the inspector would expect is that the council would put forward a planning officer to put forward the council's case, not a legal representative at all. So again, in terms of costs, you've obviously got the cost and time of the officer attending the hearing, but you haven't got the cost of appointing a barrister to act on the council's behalf, which is where the amounts start to go up. It's, I think, quite often that you'll have hearings, isn't it, really, to be quite honest with you. It's not an unusual request at all. Most appeals are dealt with either by way of written representation or by a hearing.
Thank you.
Right, so we have a proposer. Councillor Bailey?
If I can get this to work.
That's it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd like to second the proposal. Thank you, Councillor Howe. Looking at my list here, there are so many things that this scheme's against. Probably about 20 different items in our strategies, national planning framework and whatever. Also, I find, to my annoyance, that there's no provision for affordable homes at all. No provision has been made for 106 contributions. So as far as I'm concerned, it's just not going to fly at all. And I go with the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Any other speakers? In that case, Mr. Hunter. We have a proposer and a seconder. Over to you.
Thank you. Could I just clarify with Councillor Barlow, one of the things that's in the officer's report is to firstly to adopt the appropriate assessment. So can you take that on board with regards to your proposal?
Yes, happy to.
Okay, thank you. So on that basis, we've got a proposal put forward by Councillor Barlow, seconded by Councillor Bailey, to number 1, adopt the appropriate assessment, and then number 2, to advise the Secretary of State that had the Planning Authority been able to determine this application, then it would have resulted in a refusal for the reasons set out in the report. And also to note as well that the officers do request that the Planning Inspectorate deal with this by way of a hearing rather than written representations. All those in favour, if you could show your hands.
Unanimous.
Unanimous, thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you. Right. I'll just give them a few minutes to... That's better. Okay. Right. Next, agenda item 8, please. Planning application 23-0116 full land at Parrix Lane, Hawkchurch, pages 52 to 63. Mrs. Ormsby, please.
So this is a retrospective application for the change of use of agricultural land and buildings to private equestrian use, the construction of a menage and the construction of a replacement for building 2, and the buildings 2 and 3 that would be retained to be used for purposes such as feed store, shelter for vets, farriers, etc., and for storage of hay. The application relates to land at Parrix Lane. This red line here shows you the application site. Trees and hedgerows surround much of the field, but the site is on a slope, and there are views from Brimley Hill, which is the nearest road to the west, and from parts of the footpath network. At the entrance to the site, there are 3 buildings and a yard, and a menage has been constructed within the field, and the sort of usual sort of tape that is common with equestrian use is present on the site. Obviously, they use it to sort of subdivide the field in terms of controlling where the horses graze, etc. This shows here an OS showing the application site, and it is this area in here, and I think you can just see there one of the buildings in question. So very much rural countryside location. It's 600 metres southwest of Hawke Church itself. There are no special landscape or other designations on the site. So this is the landscape plan for the application. The green is retained hedgerows and vegetation. The red is proposed new hedgerows to go into the site. And there is some additional tree planting shown along this boundary here. So this is a neighbouring property. So this is not where the applicants live. This is a separate plot. And this is the application site itself. Sorry, I've just got something odd come up on my screen, which I'm just trying to get rid of. Okay, just blocking my view, but hopefully it will go away. Dismiss. Nope. Sorry, apologies for this. Hopefully it will go away when I press another button. So this is a drawing of the barn 2 that was replaced. So this is a new building. So they've given us the elevational drawings of this particular barn. And this, sorry, I think I might have, no, I didn't. So this here is barn 2, which is the building that's been rebuilt, with the existing retained buildings to the left and to the right here. And this is the building 3, which is again an existing building that's been retained. It's just being repurposed for use in association with the equestrian use of the land. And that's just showing some of the internal hay storage, etc. So looking from the site, so this is a view from Brimley Hill from west, with Brimley Farmhouse in the distance, and the application site actually wraps around the back of the farmhouse, so it's sort of wrapping around the rear here. This is a site again wrapping around to the rear of the site here, and I think you can just about see here some of the sort of the white ticker tape that's used for dividing off the land. So it's in here, the application site. And that's a view of the Sand School viewed from within the site, looking southwest, with Parrix Lane at the back of the to the back of the photographer, and again with Brimley Farmhouse in the distance. And this is looking west at the site boundary along here. This is looking north towards the Sand School, which is just on this raised area here. And this is looking northwest towards Barn 3 and the property Springfield, which is over to this way. And this again shows the menage and the relationship with this tree, because some of the comments that have come in have referred to the potential adverse impacts that the development has had on the tree. So the proposal is for equestrian development that requires a countryside location and would be small in scale. It can be accommodated without adversely affecting the agricultural character of the surroundings. And whilst there would be some visual impacts, they would be modest, and additional landscaping has been secured to provide an enhancement and to buffer some of the views into the site. Diversification in rural areas, such as this, is supported by policy E4 of the local plan, which does specifically include the keeping of horses. Policy E4 does refer to this kind of diversification as supporting viability of farming enterprises, which this isn't associated with. But there are other potential benefits to the rural economy in other ways, such as supporting farriers, feed suppliers, etc. And that particular element of the policy conflict is not considered to be material. Matters including wildlife impacts, pollution, drainage and impact on trees have been considered and found to be acceptable. And many of the concerns raised by the objectors about potential issues with manure storage and potential pollution arising from that are controlled by legislation outside the planning regime. The proposal is considered to be appropriately sited on lower grade agricultural land, I think it's grade 4, in a non-designated landscape where the environmental impacts can be suitably controlled, and in the absence of any material conflict with policy or harm to the local environment, the officer recommendation is that of approval. Thank you.
You can ask a question.
Thank you. Can you just say that should we allow this, would the site become a brownfield site in planning terms if it was no longer needed for an equestrian usage? Thank you.
Shall we save that to actually debate? Okay. All right. Thank you. Can we have the first speaker, please? Faye Fuller.
Good morning. I'm Faye Fuller and I live at Brimley Farmhouse, the neighbouring property, with my husband and my 3 children, and we moved in there last July 2022. On review of the Planning Officer report, I respectfully request that the following important issues have not been addressed and therefore still strongly object. Under Policy E4 Rural Diversification, it states the application does not meet MPPF 84, and this would be a conflict. The benefit of employing vets, feed suppliers, would negate that with other ways. The applicant's vet and farrier are the same as they were using in livery, so there's no change. The question I ask, what are the other benefits, and are they contributing sufficiently to the rural economy to change the use of agricultural land? Application should not cause noise, air, water or flooding, nor harm the amenity of local residents. This is not the case for the following reasons. Agricultural land is only used a few times a year, which is evident on the surrounding land. 3 horses are kept there 24/7. Noise is constant with regular activity, gates opening, closing, quad bikes being used over the whole field, which happens from early in the morning, 6:30, throughout the day, and late into the evening every day. Weekly training sessions with Heather Seams, horsemanship instructor. Being a horse owner myself, I'm aware of what is needed to care for horses and do not understand why there's so much daily activity in view that a track system has been installed for the horses. I'm disappointed to see that there's no proposed arrangements for dealing with the disposal of manure and details of siting any muck heap. The applicant has been seen to be disposing it in the hedges or leaving it in situ for days, which I have submitted photos in my original objection. As commented in the report, Brimley Farmhouse is at risk of surface water flooding, and with the continual use of the field, this has caused more water logging and runoff from the field into our curtilage. Again, I have submitted previous photos. Visual impact. Although a landscape plan has been submitted, it does not fully address the impact of the highly visible white tape, which is used permanently, along with the many posts and rail which have increased since the photos were taken and separates the field into sections. I therefore respectfully request that the landscape plan be looked at, as the plan does not address the visual impact, especially from our property, but also the wider area sufficiently, so minimising harm to the character of the landscape. Also, to bring to your attention, it states trees will be planted on our boundary less than 5 metres from our house. This will invalidate our home insurance and could affect the home foundations, but also block out light. For the reasons stated above, this has had a huge detrimental impact on my family's way of living and enjoyment due to the noise, smell and loss of privacy. At times we have not been able to even go outside into the garden. I would welcome a site visit by the committee to see the effect before coming to a final decision. I appreciate, as stated, that there are government departments that would deal with some of the issues raised, but due to their limited resources, I've been told these are not a priority. So if the committee is minded agreeing the application, I would be grateful if the committee consider the following additional conditions.
3 minutes.
Can I just say these 3 conditions?
Very quick.
To secure a scheme of works to control odour, vermin and insects associated with keeping of horses and storage and disposal of manure, a condition that limits the hours of operation within the field unless there is an emergency, and drainage details to be provided of sustainable water drainage to assist in time of heavy rainfall and the 24/7 use. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In that case, Ward Member Duncan McKinder, please.
Thank you, Chair. My primary reason for objecting is that there's no possibility for the committee to consider any ecological or landscape impact of this, because it's a retrospective application. The damage has already been done. The site has effectively been cleared. And I think we need to take that into account. There are some comments in the report about some mitigation around the boundaries. However, from what I can see, it's been going the other way. Hedges appear to have been removed rather than going to be added to. Now, it may be that's in preparation to plant the hedges later, but I could not say. The applicant noted the field has not been grazed or topped for 20 years, and I think from that we can conclude that there's likely to be a significant range of animals and plants on the site, and therefore significant ecological loss has already occurred from this site as a result of its clearance. There was only one comment in favour, but that related to the welfare of the horses kept on site and not any wider, and I'm not sure that's really germane to a planning inquiry. I'd like to just highlight a couple of items from the executive summary and the rest of the report, which I think you should also probably consider. The executive summary, as I've said, mentioned additional landscaping has been secured to provide an enhancement. I'm not convinced that will actually occur based on the actions we've already seen. The proposal will provide benefits to the local economy in other ways, such as farriers and vets, as has already been said by Faye. There's no additional benefit there because they're the same people. I would argue there's actually a loss of employment from the people who would routinely manage the hedgerows and trees, etc., on that site, because there'll be less of them. Matters including wildlife impacts, pollution, drainage, and impact on trees have been considered and found to be acceptable according to the report. I think, from what I can see, that's not really been the case. For example, drainage, as some of those photographs show, there's quite a slope across the site and quite a surface water. And as you can see from some of the photographs Faye has submitted, the water drains onto their site. And because of the geography of it, it comes right against their building. This is not acceptable from their point of view. The site location description mentions the tape fencing, which you've heard about, but as Faye has mentioned, there are now many more post and rail systems in that field as well as the tape fencing. So it's not just there is some tape fencing and 2 extra lines of fencing that you can see on that diagram. There is rather more than that. So it's a bigger visual impact than maybe the report would lead us to conclude. Again, I note that the report recommends that if the committee are minded to accept this, that it should be done with a number of conditions. And whilst I'm urging the committee strongly to reject this application, I think if you are minded to approve it, those conditions should be quite strong and should mitigate the already increased flood risk from drain pipes and ditches that have already been installed on neighbouring properties. The conditions should restore the hedges with typical Devon hedgerow species. I note they were mentioned in the plan, but
we want to see them actually happening around the full perimeter of the site to address the ecological loss that has already been suffered and to reduce the visual impact on neighbours. The site should be encouraged to follow best practices in the management of waste and manure. I note the point about some of these are controlled by other government departments, but we as a council, I think, have a duty to ensure that these things are noted and that we expect those other regulations to be followed and flag them up with the relevant authorities. No external lighting should be allowed on the site and no nighttime use, again, to reduce disturbance for the neighbours. And that finally, no further change to the use of the site should be permitted without explicit prior permission through the planning system. So, for example, this is an application says it's a private equestrian use. What happens if they decide to stable other people's horses or offer lessons on the menage? Those things need to be controlled, and we should state that from the outset. Thank you for your time, committee, and I would urge you strongly to reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Committee. Councillor Barlow, your question first, I think. Ms Ormsby, are you ready to answer that one?
Brownfield site. So the site, so agricultural land or agricultural buildings are not deemed to be brownfield. If this became equestrian, there's a potential to make an argument that where the buildings stand is brownfield development, but not the remaining part of the land. But I don't think if the concern is that permitting this use would open up the gates for future development for things like housing, I personally wouldn't have any concerns, because I think there's so many other policies that would be relevant, that whether or not the portion of the site that's got the barns on it would be brownfield would not be relevant. Taking them out of agricultural land use, actually, there's a lot of permitted development rights for agricultural buildings that are not present for equestrian buildings. So you could argue that the potential for redevelopment of the buildings is reduced by their change of use to equestrian.
Right, committee. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair.
That's it.
Right, thank you. I am totally against this development for one reason only. It's retrospective. And I am not in agreement with any retrospective development. People have spent a significant amount of money doing this, and they should have been, or probably were aware that a planning application would be required. And I can't support it. And I've listened to the neighbours, and I have deep sympathy for the neighbours. Recently moved in to have this thrust upon them, and the water problem is significant by the sound of things. So I would recommend refusal, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Bailey, because it's retrospective is not a reason for refusal. No. It is not a material planning consideration at all, in fact. Anyone can do anything, and then you have to take the consequences. Yeah. One of those consequences is dependent on our decision, and possibly an appeal decision afterwards or anything else.
Fair enough.
But
that's the way I feel about it anyway. So I shall take that and note it in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Barlow, then.
Well, I'm afraid I have to disagree with Councillor Bailey. I understand his passion. I understand the neighbours' passion on this. However, horses in the countryside, fences in the countryside, white tape in the countryside, different issues on fields with flooding, the way they're ploughed and all the rest of it. It might not be the view you thought you were getting when you bought the house, but there's nothing to stop. And I know also about the planting trees within 5 metres of your house. Again, there's nothing to stop a farmer planting trees wherever he wants on the fields. I would recommend that the house with the trees going in it speaks with the people building this and asks them to put the trees a little bit further away. I think that is something that I would always encourage, that neighbours get on with each other, which I know isn't always easy. I can't see any reason why you're going to stand this. I actually went out to this site, and I didn't let myself be known, but I stood and looked and couldn't see. It wasn't the tidiest farm site. However, there are many farms I've been to that aren't exactly the tidiest sites. And I don't think there's any reason why we could stop this. I was rather hoping that Mrs. Ormsby would say, by building a menage, will allow a brownfield site in the future, which I would then be very much against. If it was possible to put a condition on it, should this not be used for equestrian in the future, so in other words, if the landowner should sell and it go back, it should be returned to a green field. But other than that, I would have to support this. So I can't second Councillor Bailey, I'm afraid. And for that reason, I would propose that we support the officer's recommendation to approve with the conditions put in place, and if possible, to put in a condition that should it ever be stopped to be used as equestrian, it is returned to a green field. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Levine.
Thank you, Chair. My main concern with the thing is the flooding. We've got horses in the field compacting the soil. Flooding will occur, and the disposal of waste. So though I'm minded to accept the recommendation, I feel that we really need to put more stringent conditions on it regarding flooding and take on board some of the conditions that Councillor McKinder just told us about.
Ms. Ormsby, could you come back on that one?
Well, there's firstly just commenting on the condition that Councillor Barlow has suggested, which is that the application be returned to a greenfield site. The site, prior to any change of use taking place, there were already 3 barns on the field. I think it would be unreasonable to require their removal. The change to any alternative use would, as a matter of course, require planning permission in any event. It's possible to have a condition requiring the menage to be removed, should it no longer be required for the purposes of exercising horses, because that's the only sort of other element of specific development other than the erecting of fences, which is permitted development in any event. So that could be possible, a condition requiring removal of menage if it is no longer required for equestrian purposes. In terms of the issues of effectively the management of manure, again, if there are issues arising, I mean, obviously this was originally agricultural land, which could be housing animals of any type, which themselves could be creating would be creating waste. Horse manure, I suppose, is slightly unusual that it's removed from the land normally, and if there are issues, it can be controlled by environmental health. However, it's possible to put a condition on requiring details of the siting and means of managing the manure that's created on site. We could put a planning condition on to require details of that and adherence with the agreed scheme. And that's something that we could then discuss with our environmental health officer to ensure that they felt it was going to be a satisfactory.
Councillor Barlow?
I'm happy to include that in my recommendation if Councillor Levine is happy with that.
May I just?
Yep, go on, Councillor Levine.
May I just ask about the restriction of use of we heard about the noise pollution caused by works on the site at night hours or very early in the morning. Is there any possibility of putting a restriction on the use of the site to more sociable hours?
Wendy?
I think it's challenging. The use for horses will be 24 hours because the horses will be on the site for 24 hours. The comings and goings, I mean, it is typical that with equestrian use that visits are often early in the morning and often last thing, before in the evening, or in the winter, obviously earlier than that. There is a proposal to say that there should be no external lighting provided at the site, which in itself would prevent use of the menage, for example, after dark. I think, I personally think it would be, for such a relatively small scale operation, there is a condition to say it's not to be used commercially, to be restricted the comings and goings. I mean, again, if this was agricultural land that was being used for keeping of chickens, keeping of goats, or anything like that, then the people managing that land or managing those animals would come and go as required. So I think with the no external lighting condition, which prevents use of the menage, I don't think it would be reasonable to put hours of use restriction on.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a proposer and a seconder. Councillor Levine, you happy seconding that? Okay. Councillor? Mr. Hunter, Councillor God, you wouldn't do that.
Elevating me there. Okay. Thanks, Chair. So we've got a proposal put forward by Councillor Barlow to approve the application as set out in the officer's report, with 2 additional conditions, as I understand it. One, the removal of the menage if it's no longer required for equestrian purposes in the future, and secondly, to condition how the manure is dealt with on the site. Is that correct? Yep. Okay, thank you. All those in favour, if you could raise your hands, please. 5, and all those against. So that's carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Right, that's we're then. Yeah. Right. Agenda item 9, planning application 230624 full, Luscums Back Lane, Newton Poppleford, pages 64 to 78. Miss Ormsby, please.
Oh. Oh. Streamed it to the...
Okay. So this application is for the replacement of 5 outbuildings associated within the residential curtilage of a property called Luscums, and to replace those 5 outbuildings with 3 new outbuildings for ancillary purposes, use as a workshop and store, and stables. And the site is at Luscums, Back Lane, Newton Poppleford. The site is just outside of the built-up area of Newton Poppleford and is within the area of outstanding natural beauty. And the site slopes upwards from south to north. This is an aerial view of the site, just to show the site in its context. Sorry, I've still got this message in the middle of my screen blocking my views, so I'm having to peer around the corner. So, because I can't actually see this on my screen. But the site is here. Sorry, it's not. Yeah, my mouse isn't working very well, but it doesn't want to. So, why won't it work properly? Yeah, I think it's probably because I've got this annoying thing in the middle of the screen. It's just to the right of that. So where you can see to the top a white building, that's the existing building at the back of the plot at the moment. I don't know why the mouse won't move right over to where it actually is. I've got a location plan coming up anyway. But what's also relevant to note is the recreation ground, which is in here, which is the main point where you get views of the site from. So just pointing that out. I think it's also just worth noticing in this that the gardens of the neighbouring properties also go as far as the curtilage of this particular dwelling in this little grouping of houses. So this is the existing site plan, which shows the buildings that are there at the moment, right up at the top, at the back of the site, and another building here. And then you have the main house closer to the road down here. And there's an existing driveway. The intention is to demolish all 5 of these buildings. This is the existing buildings, buildings 3, 4 and 5, as you can see, relatively sort of ordinary in their appearance as ancillary outbuildings. And this shows the layout of the proposed scheme. So you can see there's one new building here, another one in here, and this is the stable block proposed here. And what you can see in red is the footprint of the buildings that are to be demolished there and in there. There was a previous application for a single large building that was withdrawn, and this is due to concerns raised by, well, there was a lot of objections, but also concerns from officers. And so this is a sort of a somewhat scaled down version of the scheme that was previously withdrawn. The scheme also includes the laying out of a concrete yard area here in this corner. There is also in this area under here that my cursor won't quite go to. Hopefully you'll see on the pictures there are some young trees in front where I really apologise for this. I don't know, this message on my screen that won't go away from the screen is stopping the cursor moving. There are some trees which we'll see in a photograph, some young trees, 5 young trees that will have to be removed to facilitate this development. So this is the proposed buildings. They will be, the external elevations will be timber cladding with metal sheeting roofs. The eaves of these buildings here, which are the bigger buildings at the back of the site. So there's this one here and then the wider one here. The eaves height is 3.1 metres and the ridge height 4.5 metres. The height of the tallest existing building is 4.6 metres. So these are marginally lower than the tallest building that's currently on the site. The floor area is almost doubling. At the moment, it's about 106 square metres, and it will, with the new development, will go up to about 200 square metres. That includes the stable block. And this is the stable block, a smaller building, similar materials, eaves of 2.1 metres and ridge height of 3 metres. So here are some photographs of the site. So this is Luscums. So this is the sort of the host property, and you can see the garden rising to the rear, and you can see there views of the existing buildings that are within the site. So this is a view from the playing field, and it's also worth noticing the rising tree and hedge line that comes up at the back of the site. Some of the objections have been referring to this as being above the ridge line, a sort of skyline development. Obviously, because the land continues to rise and you have the trees and hedges, it won't be. It isn't now, and it won't be a skyline development. This view is also useful in terms of appreciating. So this is the building that's at the front of the site at the moment, and then this is one of the buildings at the back, and then behind that is another building at the back. Because of the way they're sort of grouped together, you actually see them as almost a single mass as it is, which is one of the considerations that officers have made in terms of the landscape impact. Whilst there is quite a, substantial increase in floor area, will that be apparent visually when you're looking at the site? And this is the predominant view from the recreation ground. So effectively, as I said, you'll have the stables forward, which actually will be smaller than that building that you see now, and then sort of the larger building across the back. This is the buildings that are there on site. Looking at the site from the southeast, they ought to be demolished. This is looking to the back of the host dwelling. So that's the Luscums down there. So that's standing effectively at the back of the site, looking outwards. You can see the recreation ground down here. And this is the area where the new, so that will be demolished and the new hard standing created. And these here are the trees. As you see, they're quite young, immature trees, which would be removed, and then some replacement tree planting is proposed. And this is the existing driveway that already goes up into the site, and that will then lead into the hard surfaced area. So this is a view of from the road. So this is the existing driveway of Luscums, and that again is views up to the site. And as you can see, that you don't really appreciate from road level, from this glimpse that you would get from the access way, much presence of the buildings here. So the key issue here really is the landscape impact. The site is in the AONB, and we have to give great weight to preserving the special character and scenic beauty of the AONB. So that's been, a particular consideration. The view, the officer assessment is that as the height of the buildings is not increasing overall, and whilst there is a significant increase in footprint, the bulk of the buildings, you will not necessarily appreciate that increase from the limited viewpoints that you get of this site, which is from the recreational ground, and it is also not a skyline development because it's got the trees behind it. So the officer view is that the impact on the AONB is acceptable and won't have any adverse impacts. There's been comments about this being grade 1 agricultural land, and therefore it's a reason for objection because we shouldn't be losing grade 1 agricultural land. It is grade 1 land, however, it is not agricultural. It is part of the residential curtilage of this property. So therefore, there will be no actual loss of agricultural land. There's also, we've considered the issues about any adverse impact on neighbours, and because of the distance between buildings and the neighbour, it's not considered there be any significant overlooking, loss of light or overbearing impacts. So subject to the proposed condition that these buildings are only used for purposes ancillary to the host dwelling and are not used for commercial purposes, officers are satisfied that the impacts are acceptable, and the officer recommendation is for approval subject to the conditions as set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ormsby. We have some speakers. Andrew Verdon. Sorry.
Luscums is unequivocally positioned outside the building area and stands in open countryside. The only just outside argument is irrelevant and must not be used as a pretext for setting a new precedent for development in the open countryside. This application, including the roadway which has already been constructed, removes a staggering 400 square metres of Grade 1 agricultural land from our AONB, placing it under concrete and tarmac. The plans show the top northeast corner as an existing building, but it is actually 100 square metres of meadowland used to confine poultry. It will be totally replaced by concrete hard standing. The steep slope of the land means this will increase the severity of flooding in Back Lane, which recently approached a near catastrophic level. This contravenes the local plan policy EN22 and neighbourhood plan policy EP2. The footprint of the proposed building is 3 times that of the house and is not subservient to it. The Senior Development Officer stated he was more comfortable with an aggregated floor area of 127 square metres less than stated in the application. The size of the principal building far exceeds that which could be reasonably considered for personal wants and lifestyle choices. It has the stature of a commercial storage facility. It will tower above Luscums and the neighbouring property and be a prominent feature for many aspects of the parish, particularly for the many users of the playing field and footpath along Back Brook. Policy EP1 of our neighbourhood plan, voted for by 87% of parish residents, states the conditions that need to be met before planning permission is granted for new development in our AONB. The questions it raises are unambiguous. Does the proposed development at Luscums protect and enhance the East Devon AONB? Does it give great weight to conservation of the natural environment? Does it safeguard or degrade the visual quality of the AONB? Does it intrude or dominate against lines of mature trees? Does it protect the rich hedgerow and mature trees against which the principal building will be positioned? The answer to all of these questions is a resounding no. To quote directly from our neighbourhood plan, even relatively minor development on existing sites have to be seen in the context not only of the demands it places on infrastructure and the quality and life of residents, but also of the stewardship of those assets. I urge this committee to refuse this development, as it will set a dangerous precedent which will allow personal wants to supersede and undermine such stewardship. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe we have a Susan Tribble who's going to read out a statement from Jill Cameron Webb, is it?
Only one existing building of 40 square metres is 4.5 metres high, but this is being used to justify 4.4 metres for an additional 150 square metres of new buildings. But none of the stated uses needs a 4.4 metre roof anyway. To protect AONB views, roof heights should be reduced to only what is absolutely necessary. The plans are missing hugely important information. None of the plans show the steeply sloping land profile or how the buildings, driveway and hard standing will be levelled. If they're levelled by being elevated on platforms or have retaining walls, they will look even more prominent in the AONB. Otherwise, earthworks will cause root damage to the ancient rear hedge as it's so close to this new buildings. The plan also fails to say what materials will be used to face any of these platforms or retaining walls. The plan shows absolutely no detail for the hard standing and new driveways, in particular how 220 square metres of AONB will be covered in concrete and how it contravenes NHB policy HQD1A, which clearly states that concrete is unacceptable for hard standing. The planning officer thinks that the significant increase in floor area would not have an unduly harmful additional impact on the AONB, etc. But it most certainly would, and the harmful impact can be measured. The new buildings will be 80% bigger than before. Another 220 square metres will be covered in driveways and hard standing. New platforms and retaining walls will be highly visible. 150 square metres of new buildings will be higher than before, with highly visible metal roofs. The new buildings are higher up the slope, so will look higher than before. The buildings are nearer the ancient hedge, and so will cause damage to them. So the new development can be significantly more harmful. It's much bigger and higher, and so will look demonstrably worse, and will definitely damage an extra 300 square metres of AONB land than the existing buildings. The new development will be most visible from the playing fields and pavilion, which are used by hundreds of people locally and visitors for events, cricket, football, the play park and the new multi-use games area. It is also highly visible to the hundreds of walkers using Back Lane to get to the countryside and those across the valley that can also see it. I strongly ask you to refuse this development as it will unduly harmful to the AONB.
Thank you. I believe we've got you again now as Newton Poplarford Parish Council.
As Chair of the Newton Poplarford Parish Council, I wish to make this statement. The committee report confirms this development is outside the built-up area boundary in the open country and in the AONB. You've been recommended to approve, yet all of these demand refusal. A key factor for recommendation is the development principle. There is no objection to the replacement of ancillary domestic buildings, but there is objection. The 190 square metre footprint of the new building is a massive 84 square metres bigger than the 106 square metre footprint of the existing outbuildings. This is nearly double. In the design and access statement is a letter from Nigel Barrett dated March in which he stated, "I am more comfortable with an aggregate floor area of 63.9 square metres. Now he recommends 190, 3 times as much. Why? Why? Add another 220 square metres of concrete upon an apron and hard standing, and the footprint is increased to 400 square metres. Now 4 times the existing buildings. Local Plan Strategy 7 only permits development in the AONB for agriculture, horticulture or forestry. And the Neighbourhood Planning Policy H3B only allows one other exception, and that is affordable housing, which is not being delivered. There's no community benefits. All benefits are purely for personal use. A private gym, car, boat and trailer parking, lawn mowers, household storage, etc. None of these are valid exceptions under that local or neighbourhood plans. A planning committee told us to get a neighbourhood plan to show what our parish really wants. We did. After years of democratic consultation, we have one. But we're now being asked to approve an application which drives a coach and horses through it, which transgresses all its policies, or some of its policies, such as EP1A to protect the AONB, EP2, as mentioned before, the flood risk. And we've all seen that on the 9th of May, when all the water came through Back Lane itself. EP1F is dominant against the mature trees. HQD1A, metal roofs and concrete, all and both completely unacceptable. EP1H, no equestrian damage. If you approve this application, then please tell me what is the point of us having our neighbourhood plan? Shall we just rip it up? I ask you to use a development principle which presumes against development outside the built-up area and refuse this application. This application does not need approval. It needs shredding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We next have the agent, Malcolm Gigg.
Thank you. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to talk before you today. The application before you is for the replacement of existing inadequate storage sheds, private workshop and stables, to provide in their place a more suitable storage and private workshop area for the owners of the existing dwelling, whilst also updating their stables on the site. Concern has been raised to the proposals by the Parish Council and District Councillor, as well as 2 letters of objection from the general public. These concerns relate to the AONB, as you've heard, and visual impacts into the site. As you'll see from the officer's report, it clearly answers these concerns and states that the new build will not be detrimental to the AONB or visual impact and views into the site. In fact, it has been noted that both in the executive summary and the conclusions within the officer's report that the proposals would not be harmful to the rural landscape character and would not impact the amenities of the neighbouring residents. The officer's conclusion further states, it is considered that the level of impact or harm to the character or appearance or that of the wider AONB would be insignificant, and as such the impacts are acceptable. It is important to reiterate that the proposals are for the replacement of 5 existing ancillary domestic buildings. These are already on the site, as has been stated by the officers. This holds no objection to the principle of replacement within the officers' report. It is further stated that the proposals are in line with the current local plan and MPPF that are currently in place. The changes are to ensure that the space provides is more usable than the existing buildings, and that the existing materials, as stated in the officers' report, will be similar to that of the existing buildings. We believe that the officers' report has comprehensively addressed the comments raised by both the Parish Council, District Councillor, as well as objections received on the application. And as this is all stated within the officers' report, and as identified to you earlier, we do not wish to go back over these points again, simply to confirm that we are happy with the officers' report and comprehensive answers to all points. In conclusion, we fully support the officers' recommendations for approval with conditions. It's important to state that the application has no objection from the District Tree Officer or Highways. I would therefore ask the committee to follow the officers' recommendation and approve this scheme before you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Committee, Councillor Barlow, do you?
Should this committee approve this, would you be happy, or would your client be happy to ensure that there are bird boxes, owl boxes, bat boxes, etc. fitted?
And swallow boxes, yeah, happily. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Chris Barrott, our ward member.
Thank you, Chair. Well, you'll not be surprised to hear that I disagree with the agent's position. On the face of it, the description of this application warrants sympathy. To replace 5 outbuildings with 3. Sounds great. That is until you look at the detail. The application before you is to develop 190 square metres of outbuildings in the AONB outside the built-up area boundary for allegedly residential leisure purposes. That's all. Residential leisure purposes. To a height, yes, of 4.5 metres, which does not exceed the height of the highest building at the moment. What you fail to say is that the highest building at the moment is down the site. So the highest buildings proposed in this development are at the very edge of the site. So they replace lower buildings with much higher ones. And yes, you will see them on the skyline, in front of the trees. Okay, so if I can pass these.
No, I'm afraid not.
Well, okay, I'll show committee. Thank you. I can't pass. Well, okay, fine. This is what it will look like. Okay. So, if you if you really want to, unbelievable that you can't actually present photos in this. But anyway, we'll move on.
So just to say that the reason being is that the officers haven't had the chance to look through those photographs and validate them and see whether what you've actually put in as a drawing is correct and properly reflects the situation. So it's a bit of an ambush really at this stage.
So perhaps we could ask the officers to actually validate this before any application is considered then. Because I would attest that we will be able to see these buildings from the playing fields. We will be able to see these buildings behind the ridge line of the existing house because you're moving a 4.5 metre building further up the hill. So the topography you can see here, it's a steeply rising. It doesn't actually show here. And I've got other pictures which show the steeply rising topography of the site. I'll move on. The scale of the proposed buildings is shown on the photographs here, and that you've already seen. If this was an application for a 90 square metre residential building in this plot, the NPPF, the local plan and the neighbourhood plan would all scream no. Instead, we're looking at 190 square metres. The planning officer who has submitted his advice to the applicant's architect, included in support of this application, has said that he would think that 64 square metres would be acceptable, not 190 square metres. Members, where does this stop? If it was 290 square metres or 500 square metres, would we object?
The pictures I've tried to show you are the current skyline or you've seen the current skyline and how this will be dwarfed by the development here. No one has the right to build both a large gym and a classic car workshop in the AONB outside the built-up area boundary. That's not me, that's the law. Not hearsay. We would be setting an awful precedent to the AONB. Private hobbies requiring their own buildings would trump protection of the AONB. Is that what we want? In addition, there is the matter of a further 220 square metres of hard standing with no drainage. I'd like to remind the committee of the tremendous floods which have occurred recently in Newton Poplarford. And what I'm not allowed to show you is a picture of the flooding at the bottom of Luscums. So maybe you could like to validate this. This was Back Lane. It was a river. And that's after we've had 100 square metres of tarmac added to this site recently as part of previous development. So we want to, there's no drainage built into this for 200 square metres of hard standing. There's no objection to the replacement of ancillary buildings. Replace them as they stand. I have no objection to that. That's not what this is. This is flagrant expansion. We've heard the policies this application transgresses in the name of leisure. Local Plan Policy EN 22 says developments should not increase the risk of flooding. This one definitely does, with no discernible drainage to prevent runoff, adding to the 100 square metres of steep driveway already tarmacked at this property. Neighbourhood Plan Policies EP1, EP2, HQD1 are all clearly and flagrantly at odds with this application. We have heard the chair of the parish council question why we spent 5 years establishing a neighbourhood plan when it's recommended to be ignored. Councillor Howe, you were here in 2013 and I remember you actually saying to me, it's a shame you don't have a neighbourhood plan, because this would have stopped that development in that case. Right? Now, we spent 5 years developing a neighbourhood plan. We thought, actually, we'll take your advice, we'll do that, and here we are.
That's
So,
5 minutes.
Thank you. I'll just wind up. We do now have a neighbourhood plan. Please apply the neighbourhood plan now and reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Committee. Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I hate to say I was going to back the officer's recommendation again. However, in deference to the ward member that has just spoken, I would suggest that we go for a site visit. This is, and I know you don't like site visits because they are a waste of time and resources. However, this is something where we are being told by officers that this will not be visible. And much as I always trust my officers, I also trust the knowledge of the local ward member that this will be visible. And I think this may be a case in this situation that we do a site visit to stand there and see the difference. I think we also need to understand a little bit more with the boundaries of the AONB, because as far as I'm concerned, if this is someone's private house, it may sit within the boundary of the AONB, but being a garden is slightly different. There are also buildings on it already. It seemed very cut and dried to begin with. But again, I've listened to Councillor Burhop and I know the annoyance of having a neighbourhood plan and then having the planning committee seemingly ride roughshod over it. But I am now also understanding the difficulties that planning has when you're dealing with these sort of things. So I think with respect to the local people and the ward member, that we defer this so that we can have a site visit. Thank you.
Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Bailey? You happy to second? Yes. Any other speakers? Councillor Levine.
I'm afraid that already in the application it sounds nice, the objectors and the board member press on the panic button with me, which is, as a resident of an A or an B, I find it very difficult to accept the proposals of putting in concrete, putting in more hard standing areas, and if the planning officer, if it is correct that the claim that the planning officer said that a smaller area is quite acceptable, why are we going for the larger area in an area of an A or an B, which to me is sacrosanct? It may be wrong, my beliefs may be wrong, but I think that we need to protect our A or and Bs because they are being eaten bit by bit. Thank you.
Any other? In that case, Mr. Hunter, if you could.
Thank you, Chair. So we've got a proposal put forward by Councillor Barlow to carry out a site visit, seconded by Councillor Bailey. All those in favour, please, if you can raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And all those against? 1.
Okay.
No abstentions. Thank you. So that's carried.
Right. I think we'll have a quick break, maybe to give Wendy a chance to get her computer sorted out as well. So if we can, it's 12 o'clock now. If we give 15 minutes, 12:15, would that be okay? Before we come back and finish off. Is that all right then?
Yeah, no, it's fine. You can see sandwiches.
We will get going again then. Thank you for that. Next item is agenda item 10, application 230890 full, 29 Poplar Tree Drive, Seaton, pages 79 to 86. Ms. Ormsby, could you kick us off, please?
This is an application for the raising of the roof, conversion of the roof space to habitable space, including front and rear dormers and balcony, and the installation of solar panels at 29 Poplar Tree Drive, Seaton. So we have here the combined plans. I have got some enlarged versions because it's all quite small for you to be able to see clearly. But broadly, what the proposal engages. So you hear at the top here are the existing elevations of the building. And then here are the proposed elevations. So that is the existing and proposed front, the side, rear, and then the other side here. So it involves raising the roof generally by 1.35 metres, enlarging, there's already a small gable on the front here, so making that gable larger, bringing it up to match the new ridge height, and the installation of 2 flat dormers, one along the front here, and then a very large one at the back here. And then siting of solar panels on the roof. It also includes a projecting balcony to the rear. As I said, I've got here some enlarged pictures just to make it clear. So this is the rear elevation. So the red line shows the original roof ridge height. So that's going up, as I said, by 1.35 metres. And I think what's the key things that officers would be pointing out here is that this dormer extension is going right to either edge, right up to the edges of either side of the roof. And also the eaves will be lost. Effectively, this will just be coming up as a straight vertical line, as a flat roofed roof extension, effectively. So that when you're looking at this, it will in fact look like a flat roof two-storey building rather than a building with a dormer within the roof, because there is no roof, no discernible roof remaining other than this very small amount at the back here. And this is one of the key issues, is that normally when you're looking at dormer extensions, the guidance, if somebody came to me and was asking what are the principles I should be adhering to, it's very much so you're wanting to, they should sit, they should be a subservient feature within the roof slope. So you're still aware of the roof slope and it's a dormer within the roof slope, whereas this is effectively, completely and utterly dominating the roof slope. This shows here, that's the front. So this is the raising of the height. There's no objection. Officers have got no objection to the principle of raising the height of the building. The neighbouring properties have done it, and the way it steps, it will still continue to sort of step down because it's not higher than the neighbour. Again, the front gable element, there is no objection to that. Again, there's the neighbour's done a similar thing and added that increased gable. The issue here, again, is the dormer. Now, this is a much smaller. You still are aware of the roof slope around it. But and we'll look at the photos of the street scene, the front roof slopes of this street are still relatively unchanged. And it retains quite a pleasant character because of that. Most of the dormer extensions are on the rear elevations on the properties where they have created roof in the roof space. Looking at the side elevation, so you can see here that this just goes up vertically at this point. There's no eaves now, so effectively this, when viewed from the rear, would look like a flat roof two-storey building. The roof panels, because they're sat on a flat roof rather than sat on the roof slope, would also look a little bit more incongruous because you'll see them standing in a way rather than mounted onto the roof slope. And here is the proposed balcony. that you can see, and then oh, I thought I had the other side. The other end elevation is similar. So what this does help is understand the extent of the scale of the roof extensions proposed. In terms of the balcony, we have been considering potential for overlooking with neighbours because it's quite a tight residential area. I think the view is if there were privacy screens on both sides of the balcony, that would be acceptable. So if members were minded to approve it, then officers would be recommending a condition applied in that way. So this is some photographs of the street. So that's the dwelling, as you see, so quite a modest bungalow at present. And this is looking up the drive. So this is the neighbour which has already had some extensions and has planning permission for some further alterations here. This is the application site and this is the neighbour. So you can see it's sloped, they're stepping down the street, but as I said, raising the roof would be fine. It wouldn't take it any higher than the neighbour is at present, so that stepping down would still be visible. And now this is looking up the street at the application site. The application site, I think, is tucked in here. And what this is showing is the fact that you have got these relatively unchanged dormers. There are a few properties within the street that have got some small dormers in the front, but for the most part, it's relatively unspoilt. Most of the houses that have sought to extend have done it by raising the roof height and putting a modest dormer on the back. So this, another issue with this one is in many cases, if somebody wants to put a big box dormer on, that design might not be great. In many cases, it's not visible from the public area, but in this case it is, because Barnard's Hill Lane runs down the side here, and here is the application site. So you would clearly see that roof extension from the road. You can see the neighbouring property who have put a more modest scale dormer on the back, and there would be no objection to this property doing a similar extent, but I think that's the maximum size dormer that we would be considering acceptable in this particular location. This is another view of the application site in here. As you can see, the roof would be coming up here, but as I say, coming up vertically because there would be no actual roof slope when viewed from the rear. This is a view of the neighbour from Barnard's Hill Lane. So again, as you come down the road here, you would see the application site, which is in here. So again, you would see that element. This is showing that there are dormers. So there is a precedent for rear dormers along that road, but they tend to be smaller. So you can see them there. And this is a view from Armada Close. So it's another place where this site would be visible from, and that's the application site, and you would see the roof extension there. So the key issue is really the impact on the street scene from the scale and design of the roof extension. It's felt to be effectively an incongruous feature in the street scene, very much changing the character of the building by the loss of any sort of feeling of there being a roof slope remaining there. And for that reason, it is recommended for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We only have one speaker for this. Abigail Dow.
Before I start, could I hand out some images of the...
Afraid you're not allowed to do that.
31, no. Okay, that's...
Yeah.
Good morning, members. The proposed design has been developed to create a sustainable and economical solution to provide additional space without extending the footprint of our property. The new front gable takes cues from that of the approved design at the neighbouring number 31, allowing these two properties to complement each other from the street scene at the head of Poplar Tree Drive. The planning authority have said that a more typical dormer to the rear could be supported.
However, we do not believe that the modest reduction in scale to facilitate this would be of lesser detriment to what is currently proposed. In fact, taken in context of the neighbouring properties, it is our belief that a more typical dormer would negatively impact the street scene by making number 31 appear at odds with the rest of the street. Due to the position of the neighbouring properties, including the approved enlargement of number 31, the proposed roof to the rear will not be visible from Poplar Tree Drive. From Barnard's Hill Lane, the rear of the property will not be visible when entering Seaton, travelling south, and will partially be shielded when travelling north by the neighbour's property. Number 31 sits around 2 foot in front of the building and line of our property. This, along with the privacy glass on each of the balconies and our neighbour's newly constructed garage, will all further mask the extension from the glimpse that you may see from the road. We appreciate that every application is reviewed on its own merits and context. However, in 2021, a comparable scheme submitted by the same agent was approved on a near identical property at 19 Westeteers in Seaton. This has been included in our application as additional comparative information for you all to view. With regards to solar panels, we do not accept the comment listed in the report. Number 25 Poplar Tree Drive has installed panels on their rear roof positioned between the dormer and the ridge at an approximate angle of 45 degrees. Our proposed PV panels would be at a lesser angle and less visible. With regards to the proposed balcony, through discussion with the case officer, we included a privacy screen to the west, and we would accept a second screen to the east by means of condition to an approval. The current proposals have been subject to comment and discussion with the case officer. In 2023, May, she expressed concerns for the balcony and proposed parking. We satisfied both of these concerns with amendments. The case officer then put in writing, and I quote, "In principle, I consider the development proposed would be acceptable, and my recommendation will be for an approval." We appreciate that a case officer's recommendation is not always upheld by their colleagues when reviewed, but we feel it's worth pointing out to the committee that an experienced case officer who has carried out a site visit and appraised the proposals on the ground deemed the proposals to be suitable for approval. Furthermore, not a single objection was received to the current proposals by the neighbours, public, or any consultee, including the Town Council. It certainly feels that the recommendation for refusal has been made by the minority. We thank you for the opportunity to speak, and we hope that you can support our application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For clarity, I need to make the declaration that Councillor Ledger phoned me last night regarding speaking arrangements. We didn't discuss the application. It was purely regarding the speaking arrangements. So, just for clarity. Committee. Go for it. Councillor Brown.
Right, yeah. I've done a site visit on this one yesterday, and I pulled up outside number 31, which is next door, and the dog started barking and making all sorts of noises, and the man came out and asked me what I was doing outside. And I said I was just looking at the thing because it was coming up for planning tomorrow. And he informed me that his first application, because he's got an application which has been approved, but his first application that he put in was very similar to that one. And he said, "Would you like me to show you?" So he went and got his original plans out, which the planning department were likely to refuse. And he then showed me the plans for the extension, which he's got permission for now, which are more sympathetic, I suppose, is the best way to describe it. And I find it very difficult to approve something where the next door neighbour had a similar thing that the council were going to refuse, because of the big wedge on the front. So, you know, I leave it up to the committee to decide what they want to do, but, you know, it's very difficult to have something that was going to be refused, but we're prepared to accept it. Thank you.
Sure.
Councillor Brown, could I just come in at this stage? I know you briefly spoke to me earlier and said you'd been out on site. I didn't realise he'd got an application that he'd been dealing with and going through that in detail with you. It does sound a little bit like you've come with, you know, a preconceived idea with regards to this application and potentially predetermined it.
No,
I am a little bit uncomfortable with what you've just said, to be honest.
I haven't predetermined it whatsoever. You know, I view every application on its merits.
But I don't think this application that you've been discussing with the neighbour is relevant to this.
Discuss it. He got the plans out to show me, which anybody can get out if they go to the website.
I'm a little bit worried that you've been speaking to him about that. I mean, ultimately, it's your call to make. If you're saying you haven't predetermined it, then I'll have to be guided by what you say.
I always listen to what the committee have to say.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is another one that I've struggled with. I've also been to site. I've also had a look at it. I wasn't entertained by the neighbour, and I wasn't showed any plans. But I have had a look at the site. I like to argue both sides. In my mind, I was disagreeing with the planning officer's recommendation on this one, because again, I'd like to just draw our attention to our state of emergency, whatever you want to call it, on the environment. How we are supposed to, and in the new local plan, how we are supposed to use the footprints of buildings and not make sure that we use best, rather than taking up green land and doing that, making sure that we squeeze the best we can in the sites we have. And I believe that anything to do with the environment comes at a cost, whether it's a financial cost or whether it is something that perhaps doesn't look quite like we might like it to look like. But this is a balance with planning. So you have a thing in front of you now, the solar panels on the roof, the large, and it is a large, and I understand where the planning officers are coming from, a large box-like appearance to the back of this building. But again, it really is, when I drove round it, it is glimpses when you drive up through it. You would have to be not watching where you're going, or a passenger in the car to be able to see it, or on a double-decker bus. Certainly from the front, I thought it was going to be very acceptable. I know, again, you're saying that there is a large dormer on the front, but I thought that was quite in keeping with that, and that's the area you would see as you went down there. Next door was having building work. I don't know whether it's finished now. I did go and see it a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, when this first came out. But they had scaffolding around the house, and they were obviously raising the roof there. So again, they're changing that. I was going to be quite happy to propose that we supported this application. But again, I will listen, if that is acceptable before I do that, to if other members have got to say on this. But I do think we need to start being realistic that if we truly want to use, to try and solve the problem, that we are not going to get everything looking beautiful and everything looking the same. Is this going to be that ugly in that view to whoever's going up that road that we shouldn't allow it? And or should we support this and say, actually, the solar panels on the top, do you know what? They're not going to be ideal, but that's the cost of protecting the environment and getting us to be carbon neutral. It comes at a cost, as I said, financial, all the way it looks. And the sooner we all recognise the fact that you can't live in the perfect world where we get everything we want, and but we can't save the planet. So I do think that we need to look seriously at that and say, yes, it's not beautiful. However, it does a job. It will be super insulated, I'm sure, because of the new modern building regulations. It provides for a family to live in it rather than a bungalow that uses up, a huge footprint area. And I won't carry on because I think I'm repeating myself now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barlow. No one? Oh, go on. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I do agree with quite a lot of what Councillor Barlow's just said. Just a short thing to add to it was obviously the main concerns were coming over, the size of it. But if people who live there haven't got concerns, that people in that locality aren't concerned about that, if that's not a concern for them, then I don't feel that concerned about it myself, and I would actually be happy to support this.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I find that I'm not very happy with this because of the size of it. It just looks like the proverbial blot on the landscape. I think it's overdevelopment of the site. Councillor Barlow mentioned a new local plan. Well, there is no new local plan until it's adopted, which will probably be in 5 years' time. So I can't put much reference to that, unfortunately. It's visually unacceptable, in my opinion. It looks like a rather large breeze block, and that's what it'll turn out to look at. Some people may object to it. I'm one of them. Some people may like it, but it's my personal opinion that I don't like it, and I think it's overdevelopment, and not happy at all, Chair. Thank you very much.
Councillor Levine, you going to have a go?
I can't make up my mind. I mean, if you're only going to go on the visual features, from what I heard from Councillor Barlow, it's going to be difficult to look at it. Is that so terrible? So I'm doing tilted balance, balancing one against the other. I'm a little bit more towards Councillor Barlow and Councillor. Sorry, I forgot your name.
Wilson.
Wilson. Then I am towards Councillor Bailey. They're pulling me, two of them against one of him. I'm with them.
Go on, Wendy.
I think it's just coming back to some of the comments that Councillor Barlow raised. Officers have got no objection with the principle of this house being extended, with the principle of the roof being raised and accommodation being put into the roof space. And it's happened on many of the houses within this road, and it's happened successfully without having to damage the street scene. It's entirely possible to bring forward a sympathetically designed scheme that allows this house to increase the size, to incorporate solar panels on a roof slope. Again, that's, there's many houses within that. I don't think that we have policies that are very clear that say that development should be in keeping with the character of the area and should be of high quality. And I don't consider that there's a need to set those policies aside, in the context of the challenges we have in terms of housing delivery and climate change. I feel this house is perfectly capable of extension, but in a sympathetic way. And I don't, and the officer view is that this is unsympathetic. It is contrary to our policies because it is not in character with the area and is not of a high quality design.
Go on, I'm going to have a go now because you've all had a go. I'm walking the line between all of you, I think, really. And when I break down the reasons for refusal, I disagree with some and I sympathise and actually agree with others. I personally don't have a problem with the front dormer. I don't think that affects the street scene. I think we could allow that. Coming back to the solar panels, I'm iffy on them, shall we say. The issue I've got is the rear dormer. And it is just too big when you set it in the street scenes in the views that we can do. But being as this committee is, I don't know, not quite made its mind up one way or another, maybe we ought to do a site visit on it and have a proper look. But, I'm struggling to overturn a recommendation for refusal to make it approval for those reasons, particularly that scene there. And it wouldn't take much to reduce that down to look in keeping with the other buildings that you can see. But I don't have many problems with the rest of the application. That's where I'm struggling. Councillor Barlow.
I would agree with everything you just said there. I don't see that a site visit will help on that. I think we either agree that the back of the building is overdevelopment and oversized, or, because as I said, I have no problem with the front at all, and I don't understand why the planning officers would say that, and certainly I would support that should this come forward. I don't think a site visit will be helpful because I think it is a big building. I think the thing is that if we don't support this, then at least the applicant will know that with a fairly small change, then they would probably be successful. I will use all sorts of things because I couldn't predetermine anything going forward. So I would then put forward that I would be happy to put forward that we support the officer recommendation, hoping that the applicant has got enough from this to put in an application. And I believe if the applicant withdraws their application before we print this, as I have noted before, they don't even have to pay for it. They could just do it as a final amendment, which if they were in the room, they might listen to that and think that that would be a thing to do. Thank you.
I think the only problem I've got with your recommendation, and actually I was thinking on the same lines, if you accept officer's recommendation, it's objecting to the front dormer as well and all the rest of it. And I think we need to be very careful if you're going for refusal, not to fully agree with officers, but maybe officers can help us, shall we say, in walking that fine line between what we think is okay and what we could stand for refusal for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Sorry, I wasn't aware that we were allowed to do split decisions. I thought that was just a thing that can't do split decisions. No, but you can recommend to officers that they relook at certain things. Taking advice from the committee.
So members can if members are minded to refuse an application, they can decide the grounds on which they wish the application to be refused. So the current recommendation refers to the flat roof dormer and the rear dormer. If members consider that they are only concerned about the rear dormer, then the reason for refusal can be amended, if members want it to omit reference to the front dormer, so that the only obstacle, effectively, that the only issue that a resubmitted scheme would have to address would be the rear dormer. So that could be done. So, for example, in the reason at the moment says, so the proposed flat roof dormer and large asymmetrical return gable would disrupt the roofscape. So that element could be omitted. And then it would go on the proposed rear full width flat roof dormer extending from eaves height almost to the new raised ridge height and accentuated by the projecting balcony. Full height fenestration and conspicuous awkward position solar array would be an over large and incongruous addition to the host structure, which would not be compatible with the character of the site and its surroundings, and would not respect or relate well to the scale, massing and articulation of the contextual. But sorry, I'm just going there. So basically, if that first sentence is omitted, then the reason for refusal would be focusing solely on the rear elevation. So that is an option for members.
I'm happy to amend my recommendation. Then I would do basically what Wendy has just said, of saying, although I was just going to keep it nice and simple, of due to the size of the rear dormer, that the rear dormer is oversized for the building and would create a very flat, featureless, but I'm sure that's in her wording much better than it is mine. But also to recommend that again, and I just want to check that is right, that should the applicant put in and say they're withdrawing that, even if it's on a little handwritten piece of paper, that application would be then withdrawn and it would not count, and it could be then applied for. I think that's right. What I'm saying, is that not? Because they did not certain members do that the other day on a much larger application?
Well, if they get a refusal, they can take a refusal and come back in with a free go. They get a second free go anyway. Or the applicant could ask for the decision not to be issued to them while they redraw plans and submit, I presume. But that would be a strange one, wouldn't it?
So if it is, they couldn't amend the application because the council, the committee will have made a decision. The decision to refuse. So the options are that decision is either issued as a refusal, or if before the decision letter is issued, a letter came in requesting withdrawal, it could be withdrawn. In either circumstance, the applicant, if they've never had a free go on this site previously, would be entitled to a free resubmission. The difference with them withdrawing compared to refusing is they have no right of appeal if they withdraw it. they may choose that they would like to take the refusal and go to appeal. So that would be for them to decide.
Thank you.
Right, we have a proposer. Do we have a seconder for that proposal? Councillor Levine, thank you. In that case, Mr.
Thank you, Chair. So, as I understand it, we've got a proposal for refusal for the reasons set out in the Planning Officer's report in respect of the rear dormer. And that's been put forward by Councillor Barlow, seconded by Councillor Levine. All those in favour, please?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
5. Against?
None. 1 abstention.
And 1 abstention.
Thank you very much. And the last one for this morning, even though it's this afternoon, where the hell am I going to? Oh, yeah. Councillor Brown's going to leave anyway. It is agenda item 11.
Councillor Brown, we're giving some advice to the committee afterwards if you want to come back in. For that.
Yeah, we're going to have lunch and then come back. So, agenda item 11. Planning application 230459 CPE, Gibbons Farm, Wilmington. Mrs. Ormsby.
This is an application for a lawful development certificate to establish the lawful use of an existing vehicular access and building for domestic garaging and parking of cars. This is actually an application which is determined purely on fact rather than planning merit. We wouldn't normally bring these types of applications to planning committee for that reason, but because the applicant is related to a councillor, it has to come to a committee for decision making. When we get an application for a lawful development certificate for an existing use, the applicant is seeking to provide evidence to demonstrate that a use has continued, in this instance for at least 10 years, up to the date of submitting the application, by which it has become lawful through time. It's immune from enforcement action. And that's the purpose of applying for this certificate, because then they have a piece of paper that effectively says this is the lawful use. If they want to sell the property, it's clear that it can be lawfully used for those purposes. And in this instance, they're seeking clarification that the lawful use of this effectively garage building, which is what it is, but it's a garage building that sits outside of a residential curtilage. It's got a driveway, it's a small garage, and somebody who lives nearby has been storing a car in it. They've provided evidence to us that we're satisfied that that use has been continuing for at least 10 years prior to the date of the application. And so for that reason, we consider that the certificate should be granted. So it's just purely, have they given us the evidence, not whether we think we like it. Have they evidenced it's continued for that period of time? We think it has, hence we're recommending the certificate is granted. Thank you.
Go on, Councillor Barlow.
Happy to propose support.
Hang on, actually.
Sorry.
Before you do, Matthew Dalton Arm, the agent, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. We're thankful for the officer's positive assessment and would agree with the recommendation to grant a lawful development certificate for the use of the existing access from the A30 and the adjacent building for garaging and storage of cars. We would agree with the officer's assessment that the available aerial imagery for the site shows that the barn was constructed between 1951 and 1961. In addition, the Council's GIS mapping and Google Earth and Street View images show that the access onto the A30 was constructed prior to 1999 and has remained ever since. Statutory declarations are submitted in support of this application, and they provide an overview of the use of the building and the access from the A30. A declaration is submitted by Mr. Griffin, the former owner of Sedgley, who purchased the barn with his brother in June 2004 before becoming the sole owner in 2012. Another declaration by Mr. Avery, who lives at Raddens, highlights that it was around this time that an arrangement was made for him to store cars within the barn. The statutory declaration by the applicant, Mrs. Patricia Warwick of Martin Developments Limited, confirms that this arrangement has continued since the purchase of the site in 2014. Mr. Avery highlights that the use of the building for garaging purposes has continued uninterrupted since 2012. We would therefore agree with the planning officer's conclusion that submitted evidence demonstrates on the balance of probabilities that the use of the building for garaging and storage of cars, as well as the formation and use of the access from the A30, are lawful, and a certificate should be granted on this basis. Consequently, we would respectfully request that members approve the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go on then, Councillor Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. I recommend that we approve this. I was just going to state that the building should be tied to the house in question and should not ever be allowed to be used for or converted into a residential dwelling. If we can do such a condition, which I'm sure we can't, but at the end of the day, I thought we'd put it in there.
Go on.
Unfortunately, when we're granting a certificate, we can't. I suppose just to point out that the one thing we have done is that the certificate application came in with the wording establish a lot of to establish the lawful use for the adjacent building for domestic garaging and parking of cars, and to avoid any confusion as to whether we're granting a domestic use of the building, which we're not. We have changed the wording in the certificate to say that we're granting the lawful use of the barn as a garage and the formation of the access, and removed the word domestic for the avoidance of doubt.
Can it be tied to the house in question?
It isn't tied, it is on a separate plot of land. So it is, the lawful use is as a garage, so anybody could use it to garage any vehicle. As a consequence of the evidence that they've submitted to us.
Because there's a road in between them, so it's not on
yes,
the same plot.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have a proposer. I'll happily second that. Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, Chair. So, just to clarify, you're happy to go in line with the planning officer's recommendation? Yeah, okay. All those in favour then, please? Unanimous? Okay.
That's it. Right, thank you very much. Nice and easy. You've got two choices now. Carry on. Get it over and done with. Yeah. I don't think it's going to be that long, this bit.
This is just the advice.
Yeah, legal advice. I'm sorry, we're closing the meeting. But
Do you just want to move this for the purposes
yeah,
of the
I will
recording before it stops?
Yeah, I'll just checking.
There's just a little bit of wording that the chair needs to read out, and then at that stage you can formally stop the recording. Thank you.
Under section 100A, bracket 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public, including the press, be excluded from the meeting as exempt, and private information is likely to be disclosed, and on balance the public interest is in discussing the item in private session, part B. The committee will now move into private session for this item. I would like to ask members of the public to leave the room, and the press and the members of the public watching online, the live stream will now finish. Thank you.